Hi, my name is Peter Borchek. I spent 24 years approximately in the Navy. I grew up around Chicago area, mostly in Chicago until between sophomore and junior year of high school. And then my junior, senior year of high school, we moved to the suburbs of Chicago. I joined the Navy in 1982 when I was almost 25. 2 months before I was 25, I was working at a factory job and I did a lot of side jobs. It was actually a very good job, but it wasn't something I thought I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I just took a couple of days off and was walking around Chicago and I saw this Navy recruiting office, and that was on September 19th. And by September 22nd, I was flying to Orlando to go to boot camp for the Navy. So it took me less than 4 days to decide to join the Navy. And I stayed until 2006. So it was just something I decided to do just to better myself, and it worked out better than I even thought. Boot camp was interesting because I grew up around, and I was around Great Lakes a lot growing up. Not that I had any interest in the Navy at that time. I had some people that worked at Abbott Labs, and I worked in Lake Bluff and Lake Forest, so I used to go through there when I went through Waukegan. But they sent me to boot camp in Orlando, which was pretty interesting. We were in the military, the fiscal year starts October 1st. So we were the last group of the fiscal year. So my company was Company 247. We were called an orphan company. We were only by ourselves, and Orlando at that time was the only boot camp that had females. So there were 2 female companies that were attached to a couple male companies where they would all train together. But we were considered the orphan company. We were just all by ourselves. So we were kind of the rebel company. So it was pretty interesting to go there. I did get to see one of the space shuttles take off one time we were down there. I believe it was in November of '82, just before I graduated. Might have been late October. It was chilly in Orlando the year I was there. It was in the 50s, but for Florida, obviously that's a little chilly. So that was interesting, but it made it fun. A fun part of that boot camp company is one of our sailors in our company actually lived right at the fence of the boot camp in Orlando. So he had to be driven from Orlando to Tallahassee to go back to boot camp, and we were in the farthest most barracks in Orlando, and he lived in Winter Haven, and the fence was right there. So every time we came back from dinner, his mom would wave to everybody at boot camp. But he literally had to drive 200 miles north to go back to across the street to go to school, to go to boot camp. So that was pretty fun. But those are the things I remember most about boot camp, and just again being this, I was the second oldest person in my boot camp company by 1 month, because everybody else was like 17, 18, 19, and I was almost 25. So I was Grandpa Smurf for boot camp. So I went to my second command in the Navy was Personnelman Class A School, which is the Navy's version of your technical school, and it was in Meridian, Mississippi. All of the Navy and Marine Corps admin and supply schools are out of Mississippi. And so there was, at that time, there were dispersing clerks, which took care of everybody's money. I was personnel, so my job was to take care of mostly enlisted personnel, like a human resources type job. There were also supply jobs there, both for the Navy and Marines, and admin for the Navy and Marines. So it was a mixed command. So that lasted from November through January, first week of January in 1983. And then after that, I went back to Naval Air Station Glenview for about a month, just to get everything organized, get my uniforms ready, and I took orders to a Navy ship in Long Beach, California from 1983 through mid-1986, and that was called the USS Lang. First year was very different because a week before I got there, the USS Lang went into what they call a shipyard period. So they repainted they took all our numbers because they were redesigning the ship from one type of armament to another. And because of that, a week before I got to the ship, they filmed Swing Shift with Goldie Hawn on there. If you ever see the end of the movie Swing Shift, that was the first ship I was on. And they did that because we had already painted off over our numbers. And in World War II, that was a way to keep the enemy of knowing what ships were ships, so none of the Navy ships had their numbers. So they tried to make it historically correct. So my ship was in Swing Shift with Goldie Hawn. My first year, we never had any sea time because we were in a dry dock period. We were a very small ship. We were only about 280 feet long, but we were between the two big battleships, the New Jersey and the Missouri, when they were bringing them back. One thing about my Navy career I would like to put in historical perspective is when I came in 1982, it was right the first major fiscal year after Ronald Reagan was president, and Ronald Reagan wanted to do something called the 600 ship Navy, add more Marine Corps units, add more Army units, and Air Force units to the military. What a lot of the enemy didn't know, and what historically is not remembered, is that a lot of those commands were going to be backfilled with military reserves. So a ship that normally would have, my ship was supposed to have 280 sailors on it, we would get underway sometimes with 190. And we had extra work to do because if we didn't have the reserves on board, you had to fill in those jobs. So it was very strenuous, but it was a way of trying to beat the enemy who was trying to match us man for man without that added expense of always having those personnel on board and having to feed them and uniform them and all those things. So that, I think that's a very important part of history that I would like to throw out there. And our ship was very much part of that 600 ship Navy. There were Navy commands all over the country for a while. They had Navy ships in Long Beach, where my ship was. They had Navy ships in Alameda, as well as Treasure Island, which is around San Francisco. They had them down in Mobile, Alabama. They had them in Staten Island, Florida, or Staten Island, New York, overlooking the Statue of Liberty, in Newport News, Rhode Island, Philadelphia, and naval air stations grew, things like that. So it was a very important part of the military careers and military life that I would like to throw out there for that period. I was right part of that, so very historic. Just the fact that we were always busy. Long Beach was a very busy base with the two battleships there. The ports were very busy. We got to see a lot of things, lifestyle-wise, as far as good and bad, what happens in the military. I got in shape better. We had a lot of time for working out at the time. But the second 2 years I was on that ship, we were so busy, we never missed a deployment. Our ship never had any issues. We went to Hawaii and back. We were supposed to go to Korea, but we got stopped and we had to go back to Hawaii. We went up to Alameda and Oakland a lot. The first time I ever went to Alameda, we got stuck for almost 9 hours because this whale got stuck in the bay. And they made us anchor out by Alcatraz for almost 7 hours, waiting for this whale that they said got stuck in the bay because it got lost. But come to find out that's pretty regular, that whales go into that bay, and for some reason it became a big deal. So my first day ever in San Francisco was a day that the 49ers beat the Dolphins in the Super Bowl. So I got to see that at a place that was going on. So that was fun. We went up to Vancouver, British Columbia for an anniversary of the Canadian Navy and participated in some things up there with them. That was in 1985. So did a lot of things over there, and we did a lot of training with other navies as well. So we went to we were supposed to go through the Panama Canal, but we just stayed on the one side of Panama in '86, and we did some Coast Guard command type things. They were in charge of us, and we helped the Coast Guard out with a lot of things. So I was one of the first sailors to be awarded, our ship was, a Coast Guard Meritorious Service Medal, and then it became more regular for other ships after that, but we were one of the first ships to get that. Just the sailors in general. Something that I think it is very important to know is that to a lot of people that have never served in the military, they think the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, Air Force are airplanes, tanks, ships, but if you don't have the people, those ships don't work. And you have to learn to grow as a team. 1983, they had just had about an 80% turnover in personnel. So we had a whole bunch of new sailors that got to that ship at the same time, and officers. And those sailors and officers became a really good crew, especially after that 1 year of in the yard period where we went to a couple extra schools, got some things caught up that were not up to date that needed to be done. And once we started getting underway, we formed a good team. We had good fire parties. We had good interaction with each other. I still keep in touch with about 4 or 5 sailors from that first ship from 83 to 86. And then we still have a couple Facebook pages and talk all the time. So my best friend, Harvey Dyer, he lives in Maine. We hated each other for some reason the first 3 weeks that we met each other, but then we become the best of friends and we still stay in touch. And I even went to his daughter's wedding back around 2016 because he sent out an invitation and I sent back, says, "We'll attend." And he said, "Did you check off the wrong thing?" Because he lives in the middle of nowhere, Maine. I said, "Nope, I'm coming." He's like, "Holy cow, you're really coming?" So I got to see him again. So we still keep in touch. That's the same with almost every command. I don't really remember the bad things. I just remember the good things that happened in my career. So I moved back closer towards Chicago. I transferred. My second command was Personnel Support Detachment at NAS Glenview. It was 2 older buildings. Yeah, interesting story. The building we were in was haunted. So I actually did see the ghost one day, as a matter of fact, and then we found out, we put 2 and 2 together. It used to be a barracks building in World War II, and a gentleman passed away in the barracks, and he was known to open doors and open locked combination safes and all those things, and people would blame other people for those things. But I finally, myself and one other sailor who actually lives in Pleasant Prairie, we both saw the ghost. And neither of us are really believers, but we did that. That again was another command that had a lot of junior sailors, and our job was to make sure everybody at Naval Air Station Glenview or retirees, we did ID card pictures, we did ID cards, we did all their personnel records, we did all their transfers, all their receipts, re-enlistments, discharges, travel. So it was a very busy command. Education, promotions. So we were always busy. About 2 of the 3 years I was there, I would say over 2 years, we probably did 6 days a week in that command because it was just always so busy. Again, that one I met a lot of good sailors. The gentleman that saw the ghost, we keep in touch still all the time. Don, he's a fun guy to hang out with. He had the same job I had in the Navy. So and then another person, Mark, he's supposed to be coming through in the summer to the AMC big car show they have here in Kenosha, so I might be seeing him. And I haven't seen him since 1987, I want to say, because he separated in 1987. But that was a fun command because I changed jobs about every 4 months, so I got to learn a little bit of everything of my job. So instead of just being one job, I got to do a little bit of everything. Yes, I went. My third command was Navy Reserve Center in Billings, Montana. The Navy sent me to a 2-week school in New Orleans to learn more in-depth human resources for the Navy. It was called the classification program. And I went to a reserve center in Billings, Montana from 1989 to 1992. It was it was a park field house that they made a reserve center in World War II, and it was still a reserve center in 1989. So it was only supposed to be a temporary building, so it was very, very old. They have since moved the reserve center to the western part of the city, and it's a brand new building. Ours was very old. Reserve program, so you're active duty in a town, and we only had 9 other active duty sailors at our reserve center. We had Marines on the other side that were active duty, so we worked a lot with them, but you learned a lot about community involvement. And then you also learned how important the reserves are to a command as a backfill. So I met a lot of nice people at that command. a very interesting thing I got to do in my second year in Billings was we had a a Vietnam veteran, Agent Orange victim that had passed away, and his widow was having trouble getting him buried at Custer National Cemetery. So we had a medical person, Doc Frank was his name. He was a second class hospital corpsman. He had just transferred into our command, and he knew some people in Washington, D.C., because for some reason his widow was having trouble getting his remains buried at Custer National Cemetery. It was a national cemetery, but it was closed off because they said it was too full. But her husband had already planned and got the plots for that. And for some reason, the VA was giving her a horrible runaround, but this new medical person came in, knew a few people, and about 5 months later, we did the funeral in late September of 1991. And so we had all the active duty staff, 9 of us, and about 110 of our 230 reserves showed up. They didn't even want to get paid for it. They all came in uniform. And if you're ever at Custer Battlefield or Custer National Cemetery, in the off season when nothing's going on, if a whole bunch of sailors show up, you're going to get a crowd. So almost anybody that was visiting Custer Battlefield was like, hey, look, something's going on. So that officer ended up getting about 300 people at his funeral at the end when everything worked out between the civilians and everything. And I'm a left-handed shot, so I could never be on the firing squad. So I had to carry the urn, and it was kind of a rainy, drizzly day, and I'm kind of clumsy, so I was kind of scared I was going to fall, but I didn't. So everything worked out pretty well. So, and I thought that's probably one of the top 5 proud moments I had in my Navy career, is doing a Navy funeral for somebody that finally got what they were supposed to get. So after I left Billings, Montana, I went to Jacksonville, Florida for 2.5 years. I went to a command that was more aviation style, but we were also a regional command in charge of smaller reserve centers, Navy commands that are not attached to Navy bases, remote reserve centers, construction battalion personnel, which are Navy people that build bridges and roads and all those things. We were in charge of them, so I had to supervise all that, and I did that for 2.5 years. But I did not think that job, it was a shore duty job, and it was very, very basic administration, and I didn't feel it was going to fulfill my Navy career. It was kind of a dead end job. I wouldn't say it was easy, but it was just very monotonous to me. And I like to do things different. I don't like to just do one thing all the time. I did have some good sailors at the command that I still keep in touch with, but I just didn't think it was best for me. So I terminated my shore duty in 1994 in Jacksonville, and I took orders to a ship in Ingleside, Corpus Christi, Texas, from 1995 to 1998. In January of 95, the Navy sent me to a month-long school called Career Counseling School that was in Norfolk, Virginia. And it was probably the best Navy school I was ever at, because I learned a lot about officer programs, enlisted programs, getting people advanced, promoted. I did basic things for that, but I didn't know as much until I took this class. And then that ship I was on for 39 months. We're out of Ingleside, Texas, and very, very busy. It was a mine sweep, mine hunting ship, whereas my first ship was anti-submarine, had a lot of armament. Our ship, all we had was mine hunting gear and mine sweeping gear. So that was different, and it was about 2/3 the size of my first ship. It was less than, it's about 236 feet long and about 37 feet wide with 85 sailors on it. So it was very tight squeeze. So if you picture your high school classroom and 85 guys living on there and going from Corpus Christi, Texas to Europe and back, it's pretty interesting. You get to know everybody. So, and anybody that tells you that they don't get seasick on a minesweep is fibbing to you, because everybody gets seasick at least once. So, and that was my career over there. So I'm going to go over the rest of my career so I can see how everything works. So after I left Corpus Christi, Texas, I went to Great Lakes for 4 years. I was also at staff command over there. My second year at Great Lakes, I was selected as Sailor of the Year for both the command and for the whole Midwestern region of the Navy. And after that happened, September of '99, I was selected as Chief Petty Officer in the Navy, and that was one of the proudest things I ever had happen, because I finally felt like my Navy career accomplished something. I don't think I would have made Chief Petty Officer if I stayed in Jacksonville, and I wanted to take that chance of going back to sea to try. I knew it wasn't a guarantee, but I knew that finally made it the right decision. And so when I made chief, it was very, very proud. I went through about 8 weeks of training before I put on the pin in September of '99. And I learned a lot of suicide prevention. I learned how to budget for other sailors. I learned how to how you don't have to worry about what happened in the past. You can only worry about, okay, this is where we're at now. How are we going to fix it now? And going through that training with the chiefs really helped me a lot, and the rest of my life. And then after leaving Great Lakes in 2002, I transferred to a aviation command in Norfolk, Virginia, and it was through 2006. But I was going to retire in October of 2006, but I had some family issues. My dad had passed away in March of 2006, and my family wasn't ready for that. So when I went back to Norfolk, I said, I think I need to get back to my family. So I decided to retire a couple months earlier from that. So, but Norfolk was interesting too, because it was not the easiest of commands I was at, because all of my other commands were what they called surface commands. This one was more aviation in style. So I wasn't used to being around a lot of pilots and a lot of people that did different jobs than the surface ones. So I was hitting some roadblocks on that job too. So it was kind of almost time for me to retire, I would say. So I enjoyed my Navy career, but it was also time for me to get out. So after the Navy was a little different for me, because I played hockey for years, and I also tend to be a little clumsy. So I had to stay in Virginia for about 5 months after I retired, because I had to finish dental implant surgery. So I was just taking some side jobs and all those things while I was out there. Finally finished my dental implant surgery, came back to Chicago, and I found a few jobs, and I wasn't used to being a civilian again. However, I think my Navy training helped me in a lot of those other jobs. My mom was a little sick, so I took a job at a Red Lobster, and after working at a Red Lobster for about a month, they put me in a position that normally someone at Red Lobster would do in 2 years. My boss came up to me and said, I'm going to make you what they call a service pro, which is like a dining room supervisor. And normally it's a 2-year program for anybody that worked at Red Lobster. And he sat me down for about 2 days and had me read this book. And then about 4 months later, I was doing this supervisor program. So it trained me for a lot, but also, having to go back to dealing with civilians a lot was a little difficult. The other thing that I think that the Navy really helped me with was not expecting everybody to be the same. Everybody has their own pluses and minuses, and if you have a ship that has 260 guys on it, or a ship that has 85 sailors on it, you have to have your engineers, you have to have your electronics people, have to have your admin, you have to have your officers that are in charge of navigation. And if one of those parts doesn't work, then the ship doesn't work. Same thing in civilian life. If you're working in a restaurant job or you're working in a factory, not everybody is going to be able to do the same job, but if everybody does their job to their abilities and what they know, then the factory will work, then that job will work. And that's, I think, what the Navy taught me. I believe veterans are getting a lot more respect by younger people these days. than they were recently. There seems to be another rotation of patriotism involved towards veterans and towards veterans getting the things they are due. Uh, if you know anything about the VA system, no one ever really complains about the care they get in a veterans hospital. But what people complain about is getting to that veterans hospital. There's sometimes a lot of administrative roadblocks put up for somebody because they have to prove that something that they have is service related to be seen by the veterans. Again, going back to that Ronald Reagan 600 ship Navy. When Desert Storm hit in 1989-ish, 1990, about 60% of the people that were overseas for Desert Shield, Desert Storm were reservists. And now those individuals are in their 50s, 60s, and they're coming down with issues that might have been service related, but they were only overseas maybe for 90 days, 120 days. But if they're having bloodborne diseases or bone diseases because there might have been some chemical or biological warfare done, they have to prove that it's service related, and that's going to be very difficult because a lot of administrative personnel, I'm not going to say they did the paperwork wrong, they just weren't trained on it. I was lucky enough to be trained in that position before those people went to Desert Storm and came back, that I could verify that, but not everybody had the same level of schooling I did. Uh, so I hope that all those people can get those things seen. My job was to be administrative. However, my medical and dental records never made it into the Navy system. Somehow they got lost. Luckily, I have a copy of them. So I keep a copy of my Navy medical because there were two places they had to go for the Navy, New Orleans or St. Louis. Somehow my medical and dental records never made it to St. Louis. Only my personnel records did. So I would even have my own roadblock as well. I just turned 67 and I take one pill, so I think I'm pretty healthy for an old guy, so hopefully I don't need a lot of attention myself yet, but should the time come, hopefully I could be seen. I have never had an issue with the VA medical system the few times I've used it since I've retired. Another interesting thing I got to do after I retired from the Navy in 2010, I was trying to help my son find a job because he had just lost a job, and Craigslist was getting big on looking for a job. And I found a job available on a Sunday at around 6:30 at night. That was exactly what I did in the Navy. So but the job literally closed at midnight. My resume had to be in at midnight. So I was working at that Red Lobster, but I put in for this job, and I just redid my resume and got the job in at 11:30 at night. And then 4 days later, I was hired, and I worked with the pre-SEAL program at Great Lakes for 10 years as their administrator and their instructor. I would take care of all the sailors. If they made it to Coronado after the Great Lakes, I would transfer them to Coronado. Sometimes I'd have to go to work at 1:32 in the morning to get them on buses to O'Hare or Milwaukee or Midway Airport. I got to work with, if anybody ever knows the name David Goggins, I got to work with him for a couple of years. He's a very, very historic motivational speaker right now, so I got to work with him. And if you know David Goggins, how he talks on YouTube is how he was at the school. So I did get to work with a lot of heroes at Great Lakes as well. And so I'm really thankful that I got to do that job too, because I ran into a lot of great people with that job as well.